Gives me a great amount of pleasure to welcome as our guest this evening, Joseph Hlako. And Joseph works for the Endangered Wildlife Trust, where he is a Carnivore Conservation Program Field Manager. I had the pleasure to meet Joseph, I don't know, probably about 3 or 4 years ago initially. We go up to the Waterberg every year and host a wine and wild dog safari up there. And that neck of the woods is where Joseph does most of his work, and he's joined us on the safari and told us a little of all the programs that he works on. Without further ado, I'd like to ask you, Joseph, a little bit about yourself. I mean, where are you from? I mean, how did you get to this space?
Well, thanks, Jeremy. Okay, so I come from a village in the Waterberg, northern parts of Limpopo, called Watswal, which translates the birth of a lion. It's about maybe, say, 8 kilometers from Stegop, now known as Ruboni, towards the Botswana border along the 811. Yeah, and I grew up in Elazras, now known as the Palale. Went to school there, but always had a passion for, wild things, especially reptiles, but nature in general. And I feel like, growing up, my family did a good job at, nurturing that interest and love for wildlife. And yeah, I've always wanted to be in the wildlife space. I remember I saw a show on TV, The Crocodile Hunter, Steve Owen. And
Yes.
I thought to myself, that's exactly what I want to do. But no one could explain to me what I should study, what the name of the course was, and stuff like that. So I had to figure that all out by myself. But fortunately, I eventually got here. But I think when I was in high school, my second high school, the first one I went to Northern Academy in Polokwane. The second one I went to El Shaddai Christian School in the Vaal. And I saw a post on a local newspaper about a yellow anaconda that was coming to Emerald Animal World.
A yellow anaconda.
Yellow anaconda, yeah. Saw that.
How interesting, right?
Amazing. Yeah. So I actually called them up and asked if I could volunteer. I was in matric at the time, I think, and and they said, yeah, sure. And I came, and that was actually my first job dealing with wildlife. And with
a monstrous yellow snake.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it's not a common way to get into the field, but yeah, well, I just have a thing for snakes.
I mean, interestingly enough, I mean I guess the zoo and the captive animal space is a way that quite a few people manage to get into conservation, because I mean, young people in all kinds of places, they don't necessarily have access to go to the bush, and often the first contact people have with animals outside of the domestic things is volunteering in a zoo or doing something like that. And yeah, so it's interesting that's that. And I mean, and what an unusual thing to do. I bet your schoolmates thought you were bonkers.
Yeah, no, I had all sorts of names. Coming from a black community where certain animals have certain stigmas to them, like snakes and black cats and hyenas and the likes. People used to think, hey, you're gonna be a traditional healer or something along those lines. But I was always regarded as a bit of a crazy guy because snakes and black, and not a lot of people like snakes regardless of their color. But I don't know, it's just something I just like.
So were you catching snakes as a child also?
A few, not a lot. I had a good chat with my mom, and she told me no snakes in the house. and don't catch those things at all. And I told her, look, if I can't identify it or if it's venomous, I won't touch it. I
Yes.
might have touched a few, but it wasn't a regular thing for me because I was also, quite worried about what would happen if I got bit. So I was not reckless about
getting
it.
bitten. Yeah.
Yeah. I was not reckless about it at all. No. But I did catch a few agamas and other lizards.
So I went to boarding school in Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, and we had a very active herpetological society at school. We used to keep all kinds of different snakes, and actually a very good friend of mine who is now, well, he became the curator of the Transvaal Snake Park, and he's now actually a big zoo ethics guy, a guy called David Morgan. I actually brought two puff adders and a night adder in my laundry bag on the airplane for him once when I was about 17 years of age. But anyway, we're not here to talk about snake adventures. We're here to talk about your work and a little bit about some of the wine that I make. I think actually before we get on to your work, I think maybe we should just have a look at the wine that we have this evening. So I have selected a Pinotage, and it's a Pinotage called Guillermo. And for those of you that aren't aware of it, Pinotage is officially 100 years old this year. So the gentleman that hybridized Pinotage originally was a man called Abram Perold, and he was a bit of a progeny, a very, very smart young man who had actually left South Africa as a teenager and was educated and in Germany, and came back and was a professor at the very early Stellenbosch University. Anyway, in whenever it was in the 1920s, he hybridized two different grape varieties, Pinot Noir and a variety called Cinsault, which in South Africa at that stage was called Hermitage. It's a long story. It's its own whole discussion, this thing. So I'm not going to get into all the details of how and why and the like. I think that could be a story for another day. But anyway, he developed this new grape variety, which actually never was used during his life, and it was only after he died that his students were going through his papers, and he described developing this grape variety and the circumstances around its development. And the students noted that the grape variety was in the garden where he lived in Stellenbosch, and it's noteworthy because it has a very distinctive leaf shape with a little tooth between the lobes of the leaf. But anyway, the variety, I mean, it's sat there unused for a very long time. And I guess in the 1950s, people started to make wine with it. It's had a kind of a checkered history, a bit like the African wild dogs that we so love. Pinotage has people that love it and people that like it a lot less, which is sort of a bit like African wild dogs. But over the years, the reputation of Pinotage has increased exponentially in much the same way as the reputation of African wild dogs have. And Pinotage makes wonderful wine. So the vineyard itself is it's north of the town of Malmesbury in the Swartland region of South Africa. And it's distinguished for having a very unique soil for our region. The soil is decomposed shale, and the geology of the Western Cape is mainly about old sandstone mountains, very old Table Mountain sandstone, and these big granite fold mountains. But this shale was pushed into the area by ice many years ago, and the soil is rich, and it's actually the heart of what was Renosterveld, the heart of one of the most biodiverse areas in the whole world in terms of plants. Soil holds lots of water because shale is clay, even though it's a very, very dry area. So the vines are farmed organically, no sprays, no terrible things in there. It's right in the middle of the wilderness, and I mean, I've been there and I've seen bat-eared foxes there. I've seen little steenbokkies and fallow deer, which is a strange thing, but those are also here in the Western Cape. So anyway, after that, all those snakes, I think we need to calm ourselves to what you'd expect with the wine. I'm going to read the tasting notes over here, but you give it a nice smell. I don't know how many of you have got this wine in your glasses. Some I know, but not everybody. And those who don't, you can taste the wine that you're enjoying, enjoy the cup of tea that you're having. Don't worry about it. But it's really, I mean, it smells very deep and really, really rich. I mean, how do you feel this wine is, Judd?
Jeremy, you know this is one of my favorites from your wines. So I'm going to be biased. To me, it's bold. It tastes like the way it's supposed to taste. You know, I'm not much of a wine person, but this is one of those wines that I enjoy. It's dry, it's rich, it's bold, and it doesn't have that that sugar, too much sugar. You know.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice and dry, but also quite sort of rich and full.
Yeah. I think when you were making it, this is how you wanted it to taste. So
I'd hope so, but sometimes you don't get it right, you know.
No, I like this one. I really like the Pinotage. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's like trying to dart a wild dog, and doesn't matter how many shots you take, you don't get one that sits in its bum and makes it go to sleep.
No, they never make the job easy, but when you do get it right,
yeah.
It's good.
Anyway, I'd like to come on to some of the work that you do, and I mean, you've got a very broad and really interesting remit, and there's some really, really important conservation elements to your work, and things that are really important for the long-term sustainability of carnivores, and particularly carnivores in community areas, because I think that's where you have a specific interest and specific focus. I mean, I'd like to actually start by asking you a little bit about the communities that you operate in, and the sorts of engagement that you have with the varying stakeholders that you engage with.
Yeah, no, so mainly the communities that I interact with are within the Waterberg in the Limpopo province. So that is an area there called Skrekfontein, Masebe area, you know, Lephalale and Lesras area, that Stable region, Boni.
Can I just interrupt very slightly?
Yes.
Can you just give us a little idea of what the geography of the area is? Because there will be some people listening in who might not know where the Waterberg is, or at least what the geology is like, and what the sort of mix is like of people and land usage and stuff like that up there.
So yeah, the Waterberg is, you know, quite a mountainous area, and you know, there's a lot of commercial farming there, game farming, and you know, there's mines around, and you know, game farms, and that sort of setup. So when you're interacting with those people, they'll either be subsistence farmers or game farmers, or, you know, commercial farmers. But sometimes you do get, you know, situations where you're also talking to, you know, people in industries like mining and stuff, because leopards in particular, or actually any other carnivore, are not necessarily restricted by the fences that we put. So the Waterberg is perfect habitat for a lot of carnivores like the leopards, particularly. So yeah, those are the kind of farms or communities that we interact with. There's a lot of rural communities as well there. So
yeah, would you like to go into some more depth about that? Because I think this is something that's is a bit of a specialty of yours.
yes, so with rural communities, now you have these communities that are so close to reserves or natural spaces or even game farms, and a lot of these areas don't necessarily have good fences that I would say are predator proof. So sometimes what happens is, predators move around, free roamers move around, and they get into these communities, and community members don't necessarily want them there, especially because sometimes you have, predation on livestock. So imagine when you separate it by a fence with a nature reserve, and you have livestock on the one side and wildlife on the other side. There's bound to be some interaction there, and yeah, those are the kind of communities that we deal with. But now the issue comes with people's beliefs and practices and how they view certain animals, and also I think the relationship between communities and managers or landowners of these protected areas, and not just protected areas, but also game farms and private farms and stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think it would be interesting for the folks listening in to get some insights into perhaps some of the traditional beliefs regarding carnivores within community members in your area.
Yeah. So interestingly, that's one of the things that we looked at when we decided to start working in certain communities. What we wanted to understand was the drivers of some of the conflict that happen within communities, and we did find that some of them are based on belief systems, where you
Yes.
have people believing that, for example, a hyena is a messenger of evil. And I mean, if you listen to the noises that hyena make, if you hear that at night, you're not used to it. It can kind of make you to think.
Yeah, because it
otherwise,
can be a bit disarming, can't it?
Yeah. So, but it's beliefs, and some people also believe that black cats are also somehow evil and bad luck and stuff like that. But the interesting thing is that we found that although there is a certain narrative towards that, but it's not the main reason why there was conflict within these areas. So the driver wasn't necessarily the beliefs, but it was something that we did look at to try and understand exactly why people do this. But there are people that use, animal products for, belief use, when they use it for medication or, some traditional ceremonies and stuff like that. So yeah, that does play a role in areas that we work in. Yes.
I mean, obviously, leopards are a target species for that, but I suspect, I mean, at the most fundamental level, it's just the economic consequences for people that are poor of having their livestock predated on, and that's something that is very important to try and get a grip on, because part of your remit is well, it's I guess it's talking to communities, but also you do you want to tell us a little bit about the livestock guardian dog program that you do?
Yeah, no, sure, Jeremy. So the livestock guardian dog is one that's very close to me. So basically, the whole concept of it is to try and reduce predation by carnivores on livestock, and in a non-lethal way. So what we basically do is we find people that have predation problems, and then we try and assess the situation as to why the predation is happening and the best solutions to do that. Quite often we find that wild livestock guardian dogs are the best solution because the first thing that they are is mainly a deterrent. And when we're talking about predation that involves leopards, leopards being solitary animals, they wouldn't necessarily, take the chance of going against a Anatolian where there's a potential of getting injured, trying to predate on something that's not natural prey, So the Livestock Guardian Dog project is, structured in the sense that when we get to the farmer and after assessing the whole situation, we then offer them this puppy, give them a puppy, and that puppy grows up with livestock and a crop for about a month, which we call the bonding phase. So the puppy will then get bonded to the livestock, preferably with the younger ones, like the calves. And then as time goes on, these young ones get to, interact and they get used to each other. And as time goes on, the older cattle as well also get to know the puppy and understand that it's not a threat. And then it gets to a point where now you can, after weaning the livestock and they start going out into the field with the rest of the herd, you can let the dog out as well, and the dog will just travel everywhere with the livestock. And should there be anything that goes towards the livestock, the dog is gonna bark. And I mean, we use Anatolian shepherds; these are huge dogs, and the bark in its own at times is enough to keep a lot of things away. But the nice thing about it is that it's not a lethal method and it's not that invasive. And also it's a tangible thing for the farmer. A lot of times we instruct farmers as to, do this, don't do that, do this, but they never really get anything tangible. And if you give them something of value and you explain to them how much the dog costs, the dog food and all these things,
so food is part of the program too.
Yes.
That was going to be my question actually, is who feeds these monsters?
Yeah, no, we've been blessed enough to have sponsors like Upanuba that sponsor our dog food, and on a monthly basis we actually do supply the dog food to the farmers, and it's during this time we can also assess the dog's progress and also the farmer's perception on how well the dog is doing. So yeah, food is there, veterinary treatment is there, your
what sort of support do you have from your team? Because you're there at the sharp end, but so the Endangered Wildlife Trust pays for the vet and the food is obviously dropped to you, but then who distributes the food? I mean, how does it get out to 100 people in difficult rural places?
Yeah, so the simplest answer to that is I do all that. So I drive to head office where I am at the moment and collect the dog food. We do have some dogs in the Magaliesburg area here. So it's a trip on my way back home. So I just stop at every farmer that I need to see and deliver the dog food. But we try to make things easy for us not to get overwhelmed and not have 50 dogs at one time. So we normally have about 10 dogs a year that we have to focus on. So we would be focusing on a specific region, and dropping the dog food off at every farmer wouldn't be much of an issue if the next farm is about 50 km or 60 km away as opposed to 400 kilometers away. So yeah, I'd come up, collect the dog food, I drop them off, I assess the dogs and do my monthly monitoring, head back to the Waterberg, do the same thing until I get home.
I mean, they're cute, those dogs as well, even though they get big.
Yeah, no, it's very difficult not to try and adopt one and keep it at home. But
so, did you listen into our last guest, Peter Apps, when he spoke to us 3 months ago?
No, unfortunately not. 3 months ago, no, I was not able to join them.
Yeah, I mean, Peter is an incredible and very interesting man. He is in Maun in Botswana, and he's developed a program that's called Bio Boundaries.
Yes.
and it's the use of pheromones uh, carnivores are sensitive to, and it actually, I mean, his work is, I mean, it's not only is it sort of groundbreaking, but it helps a lot with helping the sorts of things that you are involved with. Although I suspect that having an Anatolian, probably having a bioboundary and an Anatolian together is probably as fail-safe as you're going to get in terms of keeping a leopard or wild dogs out of your livestock.
Yeah, no, I mean, bioboundaries are great. We also do utilize bioboundaries, especially with wild dogs, where you use lion scat on certain properties where dogs are not very liked. They they do work quite a bit. I think for me the issue is dealing with scat all the time, and it leaves a certain odor in the car and yourself as well. But it works.
You're not as attractive when you get home if you've been dealing with lion scat all day.
No, but it
And I
works.
suppose the other side of it is I mean, where does one collect an industrial amount of lion scat from? I mean, it's just there's some logistical considerations.
Yeah, no.
I think where Peter's thing is so interesting is that he's figured out what the chemistry is of the scat is, and the elements can be synthesized in a laboratory or in a factory, and that's the total game changer in the whole deal.
Yeah, no, I think perhaps Peter should give us some, end product samples that we can use as opposed to collecting the lion scat. It is quite a mission to get lion scat, I'll tell you that.
It is, and a lot of the places that have semi-industrial quantities of lion scat, you don't actually want to have anything to do with.
No. But yeah, we've been fortunate enough to have some of our partners that we work with. Someone will always recommend, and we try to make sure that it's all reputable places that we can get the scat. I think that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to get scat.
Yes.
Even if there's so many captive facilities around the country, but
they're so ugly often.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's always a mission to get scat, but it does do the job. And I think it's good to use, a combination of methods when you're dealing with, stuff like conflict. So have an Anatolian and some scat.
And good relations with community members.
That's the number one thing, Jeremy,
Yes.
because in my opinion, in the past, a lot of work has been done in conservation without necessarily including people. And,
Yes.
As we move forward, we see more and more that without, working together with communities, it's quite difficult to, conserve wildlife, because the communities that you might think are not important to wildlife, these are the communities that are actually next to our life,
Yes.
our wildlife spaces. And if you don't have a good relationship with them, it makes things very difficult for you to do your job, number one, but also for the predators that roam that area. So good relations and communicating with the community is very important, vital to nature.
It's vital. It's the absolute basis of it. And
yes.
The whole landscape is changing, and I mean there are just so many more people everywhere. And if rural communities are not invested in the environment and in saving things, they just go.
Yeah. And I think also another thing that's quite, beneficial with this approach of including communities is that you also spark a interest, in conservation and, biology, because a lot of people like wildlife, but they just don't know, where to go, how to get into it. So it does provide that opportunity as well.
So, I mean, I know it's a huge weight to carry on one's shoulders, but you really do have an opportunity to be a huge role model for a lot of young people, and you know, for people that I mean, a lot of the guys, a lot of the white people that get into conservation, I mean, they come from a fairly privileged background. They've been to a nice school. Their parents can afford to let them go and work in somewhere where they get paid very little for some period of time. They get helped and sponsored and stuff like that. But for somebody that comes from a more impoverished background to firstly to be shown there's a way, one can do it, you can do it, you can get into the space. I think it's tremendous.
Yeah, no, really, Jeremy, it is. And I think that's why things like outreach and these community engagements are so important, because to be honest with you, myself, I did not know where to go. I remember asking my teachers at school, and everyone just said to me, yeah, no, just study biology and science. You'll find your way. And eventually you do find your way, but it's quite difficult to get into the space as well, because even when you do, get into conservation, there's certain things that people from a much poorer background cannot really get to. For example, things like binos. If you don't have the money to buy binos, which is a vital thing
Yes.
in conservation, it's a bit difficult to get in. But I think with the right kind of exposure, reconnecting communities with nature, get into the communities, pick up school kids, take them to a reserve, elders,
Yes.
even coaches as well, but obviously in a very controlled way.
I mean, I mean, it's some of the most dedicated field rangers are people that were formerly poachers. And I mean, one has to use that term very carefully. I mean, almost all rural communities have been dispossessed of their ancestral land over a period of time. And, and in so many instances, I think people, I mean, hunting and trapping and fishing and everything was part of the economy of those communities. And, sort of sustainable harvesting of bushmeat was something that people did.
Yeah.
But
And I think that's where environmental education comes in, because you'd find that years ago people were utilizing these resources sustainably, but as time changes and populations grow and there's also a need for money, people start to commercialize it, and that's
a different deal.
That's where the problem comes,
Yes.
But I think things like environmental education and explaining to people how to harvest in a sustainable manner, that plays a big role in making sure that people can still utilize the resources, but also conserve it at the same time. Because I don't think it's easy for me and you to say stop, hunting, but for some people it's a sport. For some people it's a culture. For some people it's a way of life. For some people it's food on the table. But there's always a fine line between making sure that people harvest sustainably and making sure that people understand the reasons why they should harvest sustainably.
Yes. So I mean we're getting onto a slightly different topic over here, but I think that the commercialization of bushmeat harvesting is a huge issue.
Yeah, no, it is an issue. I don't know how big, on specifics on how big it is. I'm not quite sure, but one thing that I am seeing is, as opposed to in the past, where a person would go out and, get one warthog, now what they do is, from the minutes they get into that fence, whatever they come across, they take and will hang it up in a tree and they keep going to a point where they, on their way back, they start collecting all of those carcasses and then selling them to people in communities. But I think one thing that is important to realize is that these communities are quite different. There are communities where, the shortage of meat, protein is a real thing.
It's palpable and real, yeah.
Yeah, and partly, the harvesting can be justified. But there are places, especially in areas where I work in, where, bushmeat is not a necessity in the household, but it's more of an opportunity. When someone is in the bush and they see something and then that moment at that time, then they have the opportunity to take that and sell it off. And some people do it out of boredom, which I've seen in a lot of the areas I work in as well.
All of us that were kids living in rural areas in Africa shot things and trapped things and caught things, not necessarily out of boredom, but just out of curiosity.
Yes.
I mean, I did. So it's part of the deal. But hopefully you get beyond that space and that curiosity that comes from putting a trapdoor spider and a scorpion in a shoebox together and seeing who wins. It's always the scorpion.
I hope you don't do that anymore, Jeremy.
I'm way too frightened of scorpions.
Yeah, no, true. It's something that I think a lot of people, especially in conservation, a lot of people has experimented in along those lines. But it's always the I would say the older guys 18 and above that have a bit of knowledge as to what is right and what's not right.
Yes.
That tend to get bored and get into the field and do certain stuff. So
I mean, a big thing, of course, is the betting, coursing with dogs and betting on whose dogs are going to kill the most Oribi or the most whatever species that is. I mean, that's a bit of a story.
Yeah, no, it is. Fortunately for me, in my part of the world, it's not really a big thing. I know in KZN it's quite a thing. In the Waterberg, it's not really a thing. And I know with my dogs, when I place dogs in communities and anywhere close to reserve, I actually have to go to the reserves and let them know, guys, if you see a dog that looks like this, please don't shoot it. It's actually a working dog. Because people do go out and hunt with these dogs, but they don't necessarily bet on whose dog is going to catch the impala, as opposed to how they would do in the Natal regions and so on.
Yes. So part of your work is involved with encouraging people to get their dogs spayed.
Yes. So because of the Livestock Guardian Dog Project, a lot of people see me and the dogs and what we do. They always ask, things like, my dog is sick, what should I do? My dog is not eating and stuff like that, and my go-to thing is always go to a vet, but of course not everyone can afford a vet.
Yeah, and there's a shortage of vets in rural areas.
Exactly, and if your nearest vet is 120 kilometers away, and you don't have the money or the means to transport the dog or even pay for the vet. But what we have done within the Carnivore Conservation Program is that when we were placing dogs in rural communities, we did notice that there's a lot of dogs in rural communities, and that can potentially be a problem for our project as well, especially with the spread of disease and when you have this explosion of dogs in areas because people don't spay their dogs. So what we have then done is we started a spay campaign. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was back in 2018.
Yes.
We went into an area next to the Masevi Reserve in Skrekfontein, and we brought in some conserve vets from Mokopane, and we spayed the dogs of that whole community. And we've been trying to do it every year, which is quite a bit of a mission to do. But we do it free of charge for the communities. We spay them, we vaccinate them.
Do you get pushback from community members about spading their dogs? Because I know in KZN there's quite a lot of pushback and sort of propaganda against dogs being spayed.
Look, in my experience, there will always be one or two guys within the community that will say, if you spay the dog, it's not going to be aggressive anymore. It's not going to protect my livestock or my household anymore. So it's not a prevalent pushback from the entire community. It's always one or two people.
It's isolated people.
Yes, it's isolated people. So whenever we have the spay campaigns, we have a very good turnout. I mean, the last one we did in Falvat, I think we did over 180 animals.
Good.
And that was over 2 days weekend. So people do want to get their dogs spayed. People do want to get their dogs vaccinated. I think maybe the cost and the availability of vets in the area and not knowing as to what to vaccinate with at what time and where to do it is a bit of an issue. So whenever a project like this comes along, we've gotten a lot of support.
I mean, of course, rabies and not just rabies anyway is a devastating thing. I mean, if a person gets bitten by a rabid dog, it's a very serious thing.
Yeah. So and again, it's not just rabies. For example, in the Waterberg, parvo is a very prevalent thing.
Right.
So I do get a lot of people calling and saying, listen, I have puppies and they're vomiting everywhere. And, myself, I've experienced parvo. But it's diseases such as parvo and rabies that we need to keep out of these regions. And hence the vaccinations and sprays are so important, but also educating people on why we need to vaccinate. What are the consequences of you getting rabies? Because people don't realize how serious it is.
It's like
yeah. Yeah. So
sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no. So I was just gonna say the spay and vaccination campaigns help a lot in that regard, especially because they give us that opportunity to talk about these viruses and diseases and overpopulation of dogs and how to keep them healthy.
Yes. So I've been thinking about this whilst you're talking, but it's so obvious. But when you have an exponential rise in human population, you get an exponential rise in domestic pets and dogs and cats and I mean, dogs have their own problems. I mean, a huge rise in domestic cats also has an enormous impact on the environment and on wild animals and on birds. So it's a kind of a collateral damage of human population explosion, the explosion of these other species of animals.
Yeah, no, true. But I think the interesting thing, Jeremy, is in areas where I work in, especially within the rural communities, people are not big fans of domestic cats. So you don't really see a lot of cats in rural communities, but a lot of dogs. But
it's because you want people in the suburbs who like cats, is it?
Remember what I said at the beginning. People sometimes have beliefs, says cats are messengers of evil. So I suppose that's one of the reasons why. But I don't know if there's any other reasons why people don't like cats. I'm sure there's a list for those who don't like cats, but yeah, in rural communities you don't really get that many cats. But I'm sure in other communities it would be different. Yeah.
But I mean, I think in my experience growing up in Malawi, for instance, people kept cats and they kept them in their grain bins, in their houses where they kept their maize and their mabele, because the cats would obviously eat the rats.
Yeah.
But the cats were there to work. They weren't there to
working cats.
sit on your lap and purr and put their claws out.
They had an ecological importance, so they were doing their jobs. But
Yes.
I think it speaks to what I was saying earlier about communities being different. Some people understand the use and the importance of these animals. Others really don't, and you can't have a blanket approach when you are speaking to or engaging with these communities, and that just speaks to it. Yeah.
So I mean, just something that just came to my mind is that depending on where people are geographically, their experience with wild animals is going to be different, and there are obviously communities where actually I don't know where I'm going with this idea. I'm going to forget that idea. So
I think I already had a bit of an answer for you there, but I was going to go back to say it doesn't matter where you are. I think it's geography does not necessarily play a big role. It should, and I'm sure it does, but I'm not sure if it's that big of a role, because I've seen there's a community very close to where I stay. I think it's called Mobile, yeah. And there's another one not far from that, not even 10 k's from there.
yes.
But these two communities have a totally different view on hyenas and leopards. Mobile people don't care whether they see a leopard and stuff. Of course, if it eats livestock, then it's an issue. But they are more concerned about hyenas. Whereas the other guys are more concerned about leopards and not necessarily hyenas. But these people are 10 kilometers apart from each other. So
that's so interesting.
Yeah. It's one thing that I learned quite quickly when I started, because I thought, a blanket approach would work for this whole region and change the strategy when you get to another region. But actually, it's from individual to individual and from community to community.
So, are there in different plans? Are there different approaches to certain species of animals? I know I think about in Zimbabwe with Shona people. There are clan totems, and various different clans have a different view about a different species of animal. Is that something in the communities that you work in, or is it not?
Yeah, that definitely is something, because even myself, we do have a totem and a certain animal attached to it. So it is a thing, but I think what trumps that in a sense is what effect does these carnivores have on you as an individual or you guys as a community. So regardless of whether your surname is Mokwena and crocodiles are revered within your clan, but if you're losing livestock to crocodiles, eventually the crocodiles become less important.
I think that's understandable. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, fundamentally, that it boils down to the economics of a rural community.
Yeah. I think it's quite important, Jeremy. First, especially when you're dealing with conflict, you need to understand the value of what people are losing. If two goats to you is nothing, then to the next person is a whole lot.
Indeed.
People use livestock for all sorts of things. Especially within the Black culture, you use it for funerals, for weddings, sometimes to pay school fees and lobola and all these things. Although these days it's becoming a bit more commercial, but it's still a very valuable thing. And I think that's the most important thing that you must understand when dealing with conflict, that if I lose one goat a year, to you it might be nothing, but to me it's quite important.
Indeed.
So don't ever approach it in as a
Yes,
conservationist. We don't go in there and say, no, but it's just one. You never
yes,
know how much effort this person put into,
indeed.
getting these animals.
Yes,
And I think you won't be able to work with them if you can't at least try to understand their situation.
yes. I mean, to be empathetic to people that are poor,
Sorry?
to be empathetic to people that are poor.
Yes, but I think not just poor, Jeremy, but I'm talking from a human wildlife conflict perspective. Be
Yes,
sympathetic for someone who is losing something that they hold dear to them or that has
yes,
value to them. The same way
yeah,
we value wild dogs and leopards. They value their cows, they black impala and stuff like that. So if you're not sympathetic to that, you're not going to get far.
indeed, absolutely. And that's, I mean, I think that's such an important takeaway from this discussion that we've been having. I mean, it's actually at the core of everything that you do.
Yeah. A whole lot of it. It's basically based on your interaction with communities, your stakeholders, your partners.
Yes.
Without that, then we.
So we haven't talked anything about wild dogs. We're supposed to be a wild dog wine company. Do you want to give us just a little bit of an umbrella view of the wild dog situation in the Waterberg? I mean, there's several packs and I mean, what are they're free roaming packs and can you tell us a little bit about it, please?
Yeah, so the wild dogs in the Waterberg that we specifically deal with are free roamers. We currently have, well, as of recent, we have 3 packs now. So we had 2, the Tuach pack, which was named Tuach because of the area close to Al-Azras or Lephalale where they were, named the Melkrefri pack. So what we've done is we've collared some individuals in the pack to be able to monitor the movements of these dogs. So these dogs don't belong to us or a reserve or the dogs that belong to the country. And what we then did is because there's been so much persecution of wild dogs that we ended up having a situation where we formed what we call a early warning system. Because when you talk to a lot of farmers, they tell you that no, the dogs have eaten my golden wildebeest or my black impala. Now, this is animals of very high value to them, but you can't just say no. But these are endangered species. You can't do anything to them without providing them a solution. So what we've done is we've come up with a early warning system where we talk to landowners and get boundaries of their properties and collar the dogs and then monitor the dogs. So whenever the dogs are heading towards a certain property, what then we do is contact the farmer and let them know, listen, the dogs are heading in your direction. If you have any game of high value of any livestock, perhaps maybe, you should be able to protect those animals. And at times where people need assistance, we would go to that farm and assist. So I think about last year around September, we had dispersals from the Melkrefri pack, and they've done over 800 kilometers in probably 3 months or so.
I mean, that's extraordinary thing with wild dogs is they can go so far.
Exactly. They went all the way from Melkrefri, up until very close to Mokopane, back to Tavazimbi, and almost they went to Al-Azras. They've traveled very far, but these are dispersal of females trying to find an opposite group of sex mates. So they then found some of the dogs from the Tuach pack and settled around the Mokolo Dam region, which is now known as the Mokolo pack. So now we have 3 packs. But again, these are free roaming dogs that we monitor. But every now and then, for example, at the moment we do have situations where people call from that Baltimore area towards Botswana. And also towards Rankan Pass, we get all these calls of sightings of dogs and stuff like that. Obviously, we want to, try and identify the dogs first. If it's any dogs that we know of, perhaps, dispersals from whichever pack at whatever year. But we try and monitor the dogs as best as possible, just so that we can be able to prevent retaliatory killings from farmers who perceive them as venom. So we do that early warning system, and whenever there's a person that needs us to actually come on the farm, we do that quite a lot. Unfortunately for me, that normally happens on weekends. What can you do? Dogs chomp a lot of things.
Do you know why it happens in the weekends? It's because that's the time that everybody's rushing around on their farm, with their 375 looking for something to shoot, and then they see the dogs. For the rest of the week, they're in their office.
I figured it out, Jeremy. I figured it out. I'm like, okay, all these guys on the weekend when they're calling me, this is when they're having their fun time. They're driving around.
When they've had too many beers and they see dogs.
No, but on a serious note, it's worrying that people only see the dogs on weekends for me, because what that tells me is that perhaps there's not that much monitoring on farms.
Yes.
Checking fences and stuff like that. But I guess that's the time that people have. Everybody has to work. They can't all be in the bush like me. So yes. I totally understand. It's just a bummer that most of the time that's on the weekend when I need to rush to a farm.
It's terrible. Shame. I'm sorry about that. Perhaps you need to go to church that's on Tuesday rather than on Sunday.
We need to work, Jeremy. We need to work.
Just on the side, I mean, I don't know whether there's any places left. There were a few days ago, but we're running our wine and wild dog safari. Not this coming weekend, the next weekend, and I think there were still one or two places available if anybody fancies coming up to the Waterberg and having a very interesting weekend where Joseph will once again entertain us with lots and lots of very interesting things. Joseph, there's actually been a question. I'd like to open up our discussion for about 15 minutes for some questions, but there's a question for you. Do you have any kind of funding to reimburse farmers for lost livestock?
The short answer is no, and we honestly try to stay away from that model, because it's funny that this question comes up. Just yesterday we received a picture of someone that posted a dead, I think it was a sheep, and wanted to pass that off as a carnivore kill, which wasn't. And what we're trying to do is not to create a norm that whenever something gets predated on, then we will reimburse.
Yes.
So we would rather have prevention with the livestock guardian dog. So the dog is going to prevent that, and once you have the dog, you don't have a reason to go and kill carnivores. But the simple answer is no. We do not have a funding for reimbursing losses of livestock, and we try as much as possible not to make a precedence of that.
So a previous guest on our talk was Brendan Whittington Jones, who amongst other things worked for the EWT in KZN for about 6 or 7 years as their carnivore officer. And the provincial government of KwaZulu-Natal instigated a program to pay people out for predation on livestock. And it was just a complete minefield. It was, people claimed their livestock was being predated on by wild carnivores when in more than 50% of these incidences, they were being predated on by dogs, by
Domestic
basically
dogs.
domestic dogs, feral domestic dogs. And that was by far the biggest source of predation. And I mean, I stand to be corrected, but I think that the program was for African wild dogs, leopards, and lions were the three species that their compensation was to be paid out. But spotted hyenas were by far the biggest culprit outside of domestic dogs. And yeah, it was an absolute minefield trying to navigate one's way through it.
Yeah, and I think another thing that makes it so difficult is, Jeremy, me and you, just for example, we both have cows or goats, and
Yes.
you bought your ram for 70,000 rand, and I bought mine
Yes.
for 5,000 rand, and now
Yeah.
you trying to get a claim for that same amount, and it will always go to, why did he get 5,000 and I got 3,000 rands? Stuff like that is
Yeah,
is
that's
also
the
a
other
big
thing,
issue.
yes.
Yeah, so we must also try to consider that as well, because breeds and values of animals are always different. But in essence, a compensation scheme for me, I just think it's not the way for conservation. Rather,
Yes.
prevent issues rather than
Yes.
let them escalate to that point.
Yes. And there's a lot of questions that have come in over here. So let me Joseph Peter Apps has sent a message. He says, I'm always looking for collaborators to expand with the Bioboundaries project. So I think that's there's certainly some of the other guys at the EWT have had some comms with him. So I think this might be something that is worth picking up with.
No, definitely, Jeremy. I think with Peter's experience as well, I could learn a couple of things from him in terms of the boundary stuff, and I'd be willing to collaborate, especially because we do have situations where we need to employ some kind of measure, especially for wildlife.
Yeah. I think with the complexities in the Waterberg, and it is really one of the more complicated places to do the work that you do, with so many different types of land owners and different types of different people. I think having all the tools will make your work much easier.
Yeah. I agree. I agree, Jeremy. See, there's another question here about regional or provincial differences, success in Anatolians. Jeremy, can I just answer this question here? It says, is there a regional or provincial difference of success with the Anatolian program?
Yeah, please
in
do.
Different provinces. Look, I don't necessarily think that the dogs are an issue from province to province. I think the biggest downfall is how the dogs are implemented. Whether it's in KZN or Limpopo. For me, if you implement the dogs correctly, they will always do what they are supposed to do. One of the reasons why some people might say, because I remember I was in the Western Cape and someone said, no, the dogs don't work here. And I asked, what's your structure on the farm? And I immediately picked up that he has several herds that he
Yes.
separates every now and then, but with just one dog. So when the dog is out in one part of the farm, the other herd is on that other side of the farm, that herd
Yes.
gets predated on, as
Yes.
opposed to having the whole herd in one area. So I think it's about how you implement the dogs and not necessarily where they are from a regional or provincial space.
So I hope I'm not being disrespectful here, but that whoever that person is, they are unrealistic. I mean, the dogs, in part, my understanding is that they actually bind to the specific livestock that they're with.
Yes.
And if you're moving, if you've got 50 sheep on field A and you move them into the Anatolian doesn't know those sheep. They're different. They're a different bunch of guys.
No,
And
that's true. But also another reason why some dogs fail, Jeremy, is beyond how they implement it, but during the implementation phase, you would have some people that will take the working dog and treat it like a pet. They'll
yes,
take it into the house when it's raining, when it's too hot, go enjoy on the couch. This dog tends to become a bit confused as to what it's supposed to do. It will leave
yes,
the herds in the field and come back to come cuddle on the
yes,
couch. So
yes,
this is one of the biggest reasons why dogs fail, is because of how we treat working dogs.
yes. I mean, that's a very important point, and it's so difficult because you get this thing. It's the sweetest, cutest little puppy, but its job is actually to look after your livestock. Its job is not to be a domestic pet in your house. And unfortunately, I mean, you have to actually think of it as something that's there to work. And yeah,
No, it is difficult, Jeremy. Even for me, whenever I have to deliver puppies up, I'm always like, oh, it's the cutest one. I could keep this one. So it's you sort of have to kill your feelings for a month or two and
yeah,
make sure that you implement it correctly. Um, but yeah, I don't know if you wanna move on to some of these questions here.
sure.
I see there's another one about Anatolians. Why are Anatolian Shepherd dogs more appropriate for the job than more local breeds like Boer Bull or Rhodesian Ridgebacks? And they very hot? Look, I think to start with, we should just be honest about this. The dog in its own, regardless of the breeds. I'm going to talk about more, mixed local dogs. These dogs can also do the job. In fact, what we do is we encourage, farmers to utilize their own local dogs that they have to do the job. And I think what is important is, for me personally, is what is the breed specifically bred for? I mean, if you look at stuff like, Boer Bulls, these are huge dogs meant to protect the homestead, not necessarily livestock. Rhodesian Ridgebacks were meant to, I think they say, they fighting off lions in
Yeah,
Rhodesia.
they're coursing dogs.
Yeah. So with I mean, you have the stuff like the Australian Shepherds as well. Those are herding dogs and not necessarily guardian dogs. So I think there's a certain level of understanding that you need to have, that a herding dog is going to herd your livestock. And with stuff like goats, they wouldn't necessarily have a chance to feed properly because they're always in the move and the dog is always herding them. Whereas a guardian dog like an Anatolian will always guard the dogs. But essentially, if you implement the dog correctly, the breed is going to do the job. But I would much more prefer to use a breed that was specifically bred for the task. And the reasons we use Anatolians as well is that Anatolians are very big dogs. If you use these small dogs that we have in in communities. This dog won't probably be a threat to a leopard, but it can deter stuff like jackals and maybe even a leopard. But if a leopard decides I'm gonna go,
Leopard will eat it.
then that becomes a meal. But with your Anatolians being so big, they also have a spin-off benefit where they can also deter livestock theft, which is a huge thing in South Africa.
Because that's another type of predation. In fact, it's much more prevalent than the predation from leopards and things. I mean, livestock theft is the big one.
No, exactly. So we generally try to encourage communities to use their own breeds. Although we implement an Anatolian Shepherd, sometimes we also use Manitou Shepherds and also crossbreeds of, both dogs. But there's nothing stopping anyone from implementing this with your own local breeds.
Yes. And does anybody else have anything that they wish to ask Joseph? Great. If there aren't any more questions, Peter's got a comment here saying livestock guarding is a very specific task for a dog, and it needs appropriate genetics and upbringing. There's a long tradition of local breeds, LDCs in Botswana. They are most effective when working with a herder.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with the sentiments. I think in my side of the world, one of the biggest issues that farmers have is that, you would have a job somewhere in town and you have a herder who's not doing the job. They're not bringing back the cattle at times, and they have other jobs that they do without your knowledge. And, livestock goes missing and they never know. So the dog in itself becomes even more effective when they are with a herder. But most of the dogs that we have in the field actually go out without herders and are, in a sense, doing the herder's job. I think it's a South African problem when it comes to herders. I am not so sure, but the herders are a problem for the farmers, especially because sometimes they change herders, on a regular basis. Today there's this guy, next week there's a different guy, and so forth and so on. So it's always an issue with the people or the communities where I work with. So I tend to think that in certain areas works well with herders. The other problem is that some of the herders are actually involved in hunting, and when you pay that kind of individual with the dog, the dog starts hunting as opposed to herding.
So that sort of cycles round to the thing with pangolins from Zim, where a lot of the pangolins are being harvested by people that are herding cattle or herding goats, and they just happen to stumble upon pangolins, and the guys in the trade will buy them from people.
That's also another thing that happens. I've actually had a situation like that not too long ago, where I was actually offered to buy a pangolin, but fortunately the guys were spoken to, and we mobilized and made sure that the pangolin was collected from them with the help of our partners from La Palala as well, and also some team members from the EWT, and the pangolin was eventually returned back. And
was that a pangolin from South Africa or from Zimbabwe?
From South Africa, actually, from South Africa, very close to one of the communities where we have dogs in.
Yes.
Yeah, but as I said, it's opportunistic, in a way. They go
indeed.
Find
and people are hungry in this, and it's or impoverished, and it's something I think they can monitorize.
Yeah, I mean, but you you get a sense that a person does not understand the gravity of what they've just gotten themselves into. Because I think, if I remember correctly, the guys wanted something like 2,000 rands for the pangolin.
Goodness,
I'm like, well, okay.
goodness,
But
goodness me.
yeah. So things like that do happen. I think it's for me the most helpful thing was having partners that we work with, that I could actually rely on, because my job is not actually very specific on pangolins, and they had better
Yes.
knowledge of how to
Yes.
handle the situation and stuff like that. So collaboration is quite key, and in this situation it was very important for me, because I also didn't, I wasn't feeling comfortable enough dealing with the situation on my own, because where am I going to take the pangolin from here? How am I going to?
It's outside of your remit, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you don't know something, ask someone. So that's exactly what I did.
Yes. So there's a couple more questions. A Guy Werner has asked whether for you to give an assessment of how the various communities that you engage with respond to the concepts that you're working with.
Yeah. So within the Waterberg, we've had a very big interest with the dogs, to a point we actually had a shortage of dogs for about 2 years, and people really like the whole idea of having a dog, but especially when they see the dog work for someone else.
Yes.
So what we
And
then
it's a flipping impressive beast.
exactly, and they're beautiful as well. So what we tend to do is we would invite one of the recipients of the dog just to give a testimony about the
Yes.
dogs. And we tell them, listen, we're going to try it out. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work for you, but I guarantee you it's going to work. And as time goes on, dogs have a way of stealing your heart, Jeremy. People get the dog, and within a month or two, they don't want to let go of that dog. So we've had a very big interest within the Waterberg. But funny enough, when we started working, towards the King side, the buy-in wasn't that much, and I yet to understand why. But the buy-in, close to Gauteng this side, it's not that big. But pretty soon, I think we should be understanding why people don't think the dogs work, especially if they've never had them before.
Yes.
I'm more of a try something first before knocking it.
Yes.
But in my area, there's a huge demand for the dogs.
Yes. The other question that's come through by Lindo, firstly, congratulating on your career, and what an interesting chap you are. And then he asked about Waterberg leopard populations, or her, I'm not sure, saying they used to be the most resilient populations out the Kruger Park. However, the Panthera report of 2018-19 reported a sharp decline. And the question is, do you agree with these conclusions? And have you seen any improvement in leopard populations? And finally, is your experience how crucial is the conservation work? How crucial is the community work to the conservation of carnivores, or in the conservation sector? I guess asking whether actually, I'm not really quite sure what it's asking here. And finally,
No, I understand what he's asking, Jeremy. I
Yes.
think to answer the question, yes, there has been a decline, but at the moment, what we're actually busy with the camera trap survey within the Waterberg.
Yes.
Just trying to see the populations, whether from 2018 in regards to your question to now, in comparison with that report, what are we seeing? So we are busy with a camera trap survey, but there was a decline. I think there is still a decline, because in especially in rural communities, a lot of the leopards, they were taken out through poisoning in rural communities. I know in commercial farms, rather be shooting and stuff like that. But, with poisoning, there's always a risk of secondary poisoning. And that also just does another thing in terms of other populations as well.
Yes.
But yes, there has been a decline that we're seeing, but we are busy with the camera trap survey, and that will help us determine what the population is like within the Waterberg. And the second question in regards to how crucial the work is in community conserving carnivores. I think it is very crucial because in my experience, when you have communities that close to natural spaces and they are not, taken into consideration, there's a lot of things that go on there. And remember when I started with the EWT, we found out, I think there was about 6 to 7 leopards poisoned in one community. And it was not even a secret. You ask the farmer, do you have predation issues? The first thing he does, it takes out your phone, he starts showing you a leopard which was poisoned, one that was snared, one that, and they tell you straight to your face, listen, we don't want to do these things, but we don't have a choice because these things are eating our livestock, So the community engagements help us to explain to farmers the importance of having predators such as your leopards, but then also how to better protect your livestock. Because if you can protect your livestock, or if you can prevent predation, and there's no need to persecute the carnivores. And personally, I think there's not a lot of work that has been done in rural communities or next to rural communities to understand the population dynamics within those areas. It's only in places closer to your Krugers or within a nature reserve that gets that kind of attention. But if we put more effort into working with communities very close to these natural spaces, we will find that there is a lot that needs to be done. And without environmental education, taking people back into their reserves and trying to build that appreciation for carnivores, then that's a problem. In the areas where I've worked in, a lot of the people after receiving livestock guardian dogs would tell me nice stories about seeing tracks of leopards and hearing hyenas from a distance, but they don't see the need to go and try and shoot and poison and stuff like that anymore because they're not losing livestock anymore. So it is crucial to have these community engagements for the better of the carnivores. Yes.
Yes. I think we should probably actually wrap up. I just want to see if there's any. I mean, there have been several other questions, but I think we're probably almost exhausting our guests. And I'm just trying to just to see on my phone that I've now lost the connection on if there are any more questions that we need to address.
I think Maria has suggested that we please forward any questions to the marketing team, and we will share it with Jeremy and Joseph. Then I can reply there. Yeah, I think she has made a contingency for that.
Wonderful. That's great. Joseph, it's been an enormous pleasure to have you as our guest. I mean, you're such an interesting man, and I hope that what you do spurs many, many more young people from your community and communities throughout South Africa to take up the mantle and help protect our wonderful natural resources in our beautiful country. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, Jeremy. It's a pleasure to be here. I was a bit nervous, but yeah.
Well, it's something that Pinotage can cure.
And it has. But yeah, I also want to thank you, Jeremy, for the opportunity as well. And for the work that you guys do as well, because what you guys do, help us to actually, continue doing what we do, especially with the wild dogs. So yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity, Jeremy, and I hope to see you. Is it next month?
I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time, 2 weeks' time.
Please bring me some Pinotage.
We'll share another Pinotage.
Of course.
Actually, I've organized a special Pinotage tasting with about 8 different Pinotages from different wineries. So we'll have a Pinotage extravaganza for the 100th anniversary.
No, I'm sure it's one not to miss. So I'll definitely be there.
You'll be there, and you won't have to drive.
Yeah, I won't have to drive.
All right, lovely. Thank you, Joe. Have a lovely evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.